The next instrument is N, or the white noise generator. This is the simplest instrument in PSPSeq and also the cheapest from a computational standpoint. However, when mixed with the right effects, it can be used for a variety of percussive sounds, as well as pitch noises if it's sent through an audio filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger a note in the N0 track, and then I'm going to go to the synthesizer parameters. So trigger a note, I'm going to push X, and then to get to the synthesizer parameters, I'm going to hold left trigger and right trigger and press Y. Oops. And then we have the menu system up where we can access the generator envelope parameters for the current selected track, which is N0. So it's going to push the D-pad to the right, and now we have the parameters for N0. So sample hold is a sample and hold effect. The value of sample hold is the number of samples that the current sample is held before loading in a new random value. So I'm going to modify this by pressing triangle and left trigger and moving the analog pad up. So now when it's triggered again, you can hear it's playing at a lower pitch. Sounds like a lower pitch. Make it much lower. So then the last two parameters are used for controlling an exponential decay or increasing envelope on the sample hold value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set sample hold, in this case, to 5. I'm going to try setting exponent to something just greater than 1. And I'm going to set end offset to 10. Okay. So now you can hear how the sample hold is decaying, and it's going from 5 to 50 because the final value that it reaches is sample hold times end offset, which is 10 times 5 or 50. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the noise generator and move on to the next generator, which is called PSQ. So press square to mute that, and then I'm actually going to go back to loop 1, where I have all the control steps enabled for all the tracks. The reason why I didn't use this loop for the noise generator is that using the exponential decay envelope with the control tracks is a little bit trickier, so I wanted to make it easier to understand how that works, so I went to a track that didn't have any control steps in it at all. So I'm going to unmute the PSQ by pushing square. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the synthesizer parameters for PSQ. Again, left trigger, right trigger, and triangle. Push to the right. So now I have all the parameters for PSQ. So PSQ is a 2-oscillator square wave generator with an adjustable pulse width. Square waves are generated with the BAM generator only have a 50% duty cycle. And this means that the amount of time the waveform is at full scale positive is the same as full scale negative. PSQ allows you to set the amount of time the waveform stays at each level. By changing the amount of time the waveform is positive and negative, you can change the overall timbre of the sound without modifying the pitch. PSQ has 9 parameters to control its operation. First, there is freq 1, which sets the bass pitch of the oscillator. So I'm going to hold triangle and left trigger and move the analog stick up. So just adjusting the frequency of the generator. The frequency of the second oscillator is set in relation to the pitch of the first oscillator. And this is modified by modifying the offset 2 value. So right now it's 1.0, so that means that the second oscillator plays at the same frequency as the first oscillator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold triangle and move it down a little bit. So now you have a sort of classic detuned oscillator where one oscillator is slightly lower than the other one. And if I bring it down to, say, 0.5, the second oscillator is playing essentially at half the pitch of the first oscillator. So then mix is used to control the mix of one oscillator or the other. So that's the first oscillator when it's 1.0, and the second oscillator when it's 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this back to 1.0, and then I'm going to change the pulse width of the first oscillator. So right now it's set to 0.5, which means that the positive and negative portions of the waveform are equal. But if I say I bring this to 0.9, you can hear that the sound is the same frequency as before, but it's a little bit thinner sounding. And so right now it's 0.94, and that means that for about 5% of the time, the oscillator is at a positive value, and about 95% of the time it's at a negative value. But the overall time it takes to go through both of those parts of the cycle is the same as if it was at 50%. So I'm just going to mix in the first oscillator again. And now I will set. So now the second oscillator is primarily a positive value for about 92% of the time, and 8% of the time it's a negative value. So PSQ also has the same X-mult and end offset, as well as warp frequency warping features that the other pitch generators have. X-mult and end offset are used to apply pitch bend, and warp WT are there to provide a random LFO to the frequency of the generator. So now I'm going to mute PSQ and go to the ROT generator, or the rotational synthesizer.